Shalom and welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I greatly appreciate you being with us and sharing your time with us. These podcasts hope to explore some of the issues that touch us and our families, as well as our congregations and our Jewish community, as a result of the impact of the revolution in longevity. You can contact us at JewishSacredAging.com, which is our homepage website, or me directly, Rabbi Address at JewishSacredAging.com. And it is with great pleasure that we welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, Rabbi Bryan Kinzbrunner, who is the Director of Religious and Spiritual Services for the Wilf Campus for Senior Living in Somerset, New Jersey, just up the turnpike from where we are, and also the president of Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains, an organization that coordinates chaplaincy within the Jewish community. Bryan, welcome. Baruch haba. Nice to see you. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on your podcast. This is a wonderful opportunity to share with you today and your audience. I've had the chance to listen, of course, to the podcast times, and I think the service that you're doing for the community and all the people who you've interviewed is tremendous, and I'm glad to be part of this as well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And hope you're healthy and your family is healthy and well in the midst of this craziness. There's a couple of things I want to walk through with you, but first of all, let me go right to Neshama, because it is the organization that, if I'm not mistaken, coordinates, trains, works with, and supports Jewish chaplains, not only in the United States, but in North America as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. So Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains, has been in existence for a little bit more than 30 years. It was an organization started to foster the idea of Jewish chaplaincy, or chaplaincy with the language of being Jewish. I want to be precise on both of those. As it grew out of a world of professional chaplaincy, but the early members found that they needed a place where we could speak a Jewish language within the world of pastoral care and spiritual care. The organization has grown to be about 500 plus members today. We include most members are in the United States. We do have some in Canada, few around the world in various locations, and including a group in Israel who we've worked with closely over the years and have really helped foster their spiritual care work that they have begun to professionalize over the past, I want to say 15 years. And they're doing a lot on their own now, but we were involved in some of their early stages of really concretizing that as well. So the NAJC's mission really is twofold. It's, if I were to describe it to you, not reading the mission statement itself, but describe it to you as, we are the place for certifying board-certified Jewish chaplains, and we are the place for that continuing education and that chevra, that getting together as just people getting together to share with one another in a language that we commonly share, while at the same time, of course, looking beyond our walls to what professional spiritual care means and working with other professional spiritual care organizations to foster the profession, not just the Jewish aspects of the profession that we see as part of the value that we bring.
So you talk about the professionalization, and I remember when I was starting out in the rabbinate in my career, and it occurred to me, but when I started out in pulpits in California, and also when I moved back to work for the Union of Reform Judaism in Philly, that if you could be a, quote, chaplain at a hospital if you volunteered. There didn't seem to be a lot of controls, standardization, professionalization. But Neshama has really, as you mentioned, really that's one of the key earmarks of what you do. How does, if somebody is coming out of school or wants to track into the chaplaincy, what do they have to go through? Additional training, et cetera. Would you walk us through that?
So let me walk you through that in sort of a very general broad strokes. For someone to become a professional chaplain, the expectation is that they take what's called clinical pastoral education. Clinical pastoral education is really a hands-on educational model that thrusts people into a care setting with a combination of actually visiting with people and learning the skills to be a professional chaplain, as well as group work in which a small group comes together for purposes of education, peer uh, peer review, or what they call interpersonal review, IPR. That's sort of this technical term, reviewing verbatims or case studies, and learning the ropes and really beginning to formulate what it means to be a chaplain and not just clergy who walk the halls. There are special skills. There are greater skills. It's like any other profession in that one can learn basic skill, any other listening profession. One can learn basic skills of active listening and emotional empathy and so on, but it takes a more rigorous educational model to really professionalize yourself and be able to work within a variety of settings and a variety of situations. To become a board certified chaplain, which is the standard, the NAJC, along with its cognate groups, Association of Professional Chaplains, APC, National Association of Catholic Chaplains, NACC, Canadian Association of Spiritual Care, and I will not say it in French, so forgive me, all members of CASC, because I can't do the French, and the ACP, which used to be the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. So these groups have the standard at a board certified chaplain is one who's done 4 units of CP, which is 1,600 hours, most of it clinical work, and then a year's worth of work subsequent, in addition to being somebody with a theological level master's education or ordination. And of course, within Jewish chaplaincy, that's referred to as, that's our smicha, or however we phrase that, depending on which denomination or school one comes from. And in the other organizations, that is, they are ordained and, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to mess up this word. They have an imprimatur from their various faith-based groups. But the idea is that you have attained a certain both clerical clergy education and a healthcare or other setting education. So if you're a military chaplain, you've done work through the military. Prison chaplains, you might have done through military or healthcare. Whichever way you've gone, you have attained a certain set of credentials for that level.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that you just don't walk off the street and say, gee, I love people, I want to help people, I'm going to be a chaplain, especially in this day and age, and we'll get to that in a minute. But you allude to, because the 1,600 hours of CPE plus, that's a chunk of time, because I know people who have done it and are in the process of still doing it, and it is a sincere commitment of time for rabbis, cantors, whatever. But you also mentioned certain specialties. Could you just talk us through a little bit about that, so people can understand? Like you mentioned, there's a prison chaplaincy. There's a military chaplaincy. There's chaplaincies that perhaps specialize in mental health facilities, addiction. Are there then, as you go through the certification process, opportunities to track into a particular niche if I have that desire?
So not that often. I mean, if you're going to be a military chaplains, there are many chaplains who started off as military chaplains who then get into healthcare work later. So their specialty obviously is that they're first trained in the military, but many of them do then avail themselves of CPE education when they're going into healthcare, because there are some subtle differences. I think prison chaplains, and I don't know much about it to suggest, I believe it's probably very similar. Like there's probably, I'm assuming that there's some sort of, in addition to healthcare chaplaincy training, there would be particular training towards prisons. There aren't too many specialties, and I put that in quotes. There was a time that one could do their CPE through, let's say, hospice, like I did. I did my CPE training through Vitas Hospice many years ago. That was my original organization that I worked with. And so I was focused on hospice care, as opposed to being in a hospital setting where I am assigned to various floors. Now, in the CPE residency, I think many people self-select specialties within it and do more work towards that. But there really is the only certification that is right now a specialty is one in palliative and hospice care that APC provides. Otherwise, it's pretty much you have a sort of standard, and if you want to specialize, you have those opportunities. Now, I haven't been in CPE in 15 years, so I could be speaking out of turn because some stuff has changed. There's an emphasis on more quantitative research study. There's an emphasis on there's sort of different emphases they've added in to enhance the professionalism of it, but I can't speak to the particulars because it's been a long time for the education side of it.
I think it's important for you to understand that there's a constant desire to increase, as you say, the professionalism of the chaplain, because just in our rabbinate, and you're many, many years younger than I am, the shift and the complexity of chaplaincy and the interface with ethics committees and other types of committees within, especially if you're in a hospital situation or the hospice situation, really calls on a much more experienced, professionalized training, especially now. It just as I think I mentioned this to you before. Do you find more people moving into chaplaincy work as opposed to pulpit work? Is it, and if so, why?
I think there's a slow uptick in people moving into chaplaincy work as an actual profession first go around. It often used to be that a person would come into chaplaincy as a second profession or as a potential, I did this work for so many years, I want to do a different work, or, I had the experience of let's say a pulpit or education and I want to now do the chaplaincy, or I'm coming into a later life. I've had, the desire to give back in a manner of meaning as opposed to whatever my job was first. And, but I have been seeing a small uptick in people who I would say are younger, who are getting into chaplaincy as a first profession or as a partial profession to supplement some other work. And it's funny you say that because my experience, and I say this from a personal standpoint, so if I am incorrect, it was just my experience of it. I started in chaplaincy. My CPE was about 15 years ago already. And just to tell everybody my age, I'm 40 years old. So I started this as basically as a first profession while I was finishing rabbinic school. There weren't too many people my age. Doesn't mean there weren't. It's just there wasn't that number. As I said, I've seen an uptick in that across the board, and I'm hoping that continues because it is a profession. It's not just it's not just something. It's a profession that needs to be enhanced by people saying, I want to do this as a profession, not just as. And that's become more and more the case. And I think that helps people understand that spiritual care is not just a friendly face, but it's really a model of, I want to be careful with the word therapy counseling because I don't want that to be an overarching word. It's a model of higher level support of people during crisis that has a certain focus that many are looking for: spiritual language, non-judgmental presence, focus less on a diagnosis than I'm struggling. Not the I'm depressed, anxious, and so anxiety ridden. I have this, I have that, but sort of what are my spiritual angsts? I'm struggling because my life isn't the meaning that I thought it would be. And that's a very spiritual thing. So I think when we look at the profession, there is this move and there's a continued move to say we are part and parcel of when we talk about holistic person care health. One's spirituality, in a very broad sense of that word, must be engaged with like everything else. And it will enhance their lives in some way, shape, or form.
What's the most powerful thing that you've experienced as a chaplain? Have you ever? I know that's a crazy question, but just because you touched on this spiritual, but if first thing that comes into your mind, has there been one encounter that stands out as this is why I became a chaplain?
I that's a tough question. I think that if I had to choose a couple of them that come to mind, I'm going to take two or three. I think it's very hard to isolate one. I think it's one of them, and this is sort of, and I've had this happen a few times here at my assisted living, is you watch people who come in to a residence setting, and they're leaving their homes, and they're leaving the life that they had, and they come to me and they say, Rabbi, I'm not really a religious person. Rabbi, I'm not really so connected to my Judaism or my faith. And slowly but surely, they kind of begin to show up to a service, to a discussion group, to just the relationship that to have between one and another. And you can see their spiritual growth, not from anything, not from feeling a sense of compelledness, but just feeling the sense that there's another place that I could connect to. Maybe it brings me back to my childhood. This one person I'm thinking of said to me, I remember all these things from my childhood. I haven't done this for years. And he slowly came back into it. That's one example from an assisted living mode. For hospice, I always tell this story. And I found this story to be one of the most, I still live with this story. It was a rainy night. I love that part because it was a dark and stormy night.
Stormy night, right.
I was home and I got a phone call from a person. And here's how the phone call went. The nurse called me. Our patient is dying and the priest didn't show up. I want to, and keep that in mind. The priest didn't show up. I call the family and the daughter and I talk a little bit and we pray over the phone. And, the woman passed away that night. I called the next morning. Now, I had introduced myself. There are different ways to introduce oneself as a chaplain. Sometimes there's a school of thought, introduce yourself with the title, rabbi, priest, pastor, father, whatever the title, deacon, whatever the title is. And then there's the approach that says, introduce yourself as yourself. I've done both over the years. Some situations warrant one over the other. This situation, I was introducing myself as, I'm Bryan, the chaplain from the hospice, etc. So when I called the next day to offer my condolences, the first words out of the daughter's mouth were, why didn't you tell me you were a rabbi? We're Jewish. Now, her mother was waiting for a priest. Story is, she's a Holocaust survivor. She came to the United States. She struggled with that. What did it mean to be Jewish after the Holocaust? And we know many people have struggled one way or another. Some have doubled down on their religiosity and their spirituality, and others decided to foster it beyond the walls that they were used to. And the daughter begins to tell me her mother's story and how she made it important that the family knew that they were Jewish, but said, find your spirituality, find your own way. And the priest who was supposed to come was because that the mother had become very close with a former Catholic priest. And that's what she wanted at the end of life. But lo and behold, a rabbi kind of offered prayers at the end of life for her. And that rabbi was me. And I took that as it was very powerful for me because it said, chaplaincy goes beyond a title. Chaplaincy goes beyond it can go beyond one's particular religious background to really reach people. And sometimes you never know how you're reaching them and why you're reaching them in that situation. That happened many years ago, and I still tell that story all the time. And I've got other stories like that in many different ways. The person who said, I never wanted, but now I'm connected, as I said. But those two stick out. I mean, I've had in an interfaith kind of way, some of my most powerful encounters have been with people who were of other faiths, where we really got to core fundamental issues of life, well beyond just, I'm of this and you're of this. we have so much more that we can lift up in a holiness in a space or a sacredness of a space. So those are just a couple stories. I mean, I still encounter stuff on a day-to-day basis, and one always will have a new story to tell.
The interfaith aspect that you alluded to, I think, is something else that perhaps people contemplating this aren't not aware of. Whatever the appropriate term is. But the fact that when you go into, for example, in a CCRC, a continuing care facility that's not particularly denominationally based, or a hospital, you as the rabbi may be walking into a Pentecostal person who, as you said, is struggling with meaning and purpose in that particular period of time. Could you just talk to us in the training and how do we begin to understand that as a person who is trying to be educated to become a certified chaplain, with this understanding that you're going to meet it's a big tent. It's a very big tent.
It's a very big tent, and I think it's experience. That's where the experiential part of the training becomes very valuable. I can read it in a book. We can all read it in a book. I mean, thankfully, there are books on interfaith work. There are books on different faith traditions. I have, and I know many others have had, here are rituals from a variety of faiths on this topic. I did a talk years ago on that with end of life rituals. We can find the commonality, but the best way is the experience of it. And what's the language that somebody's using, and how do you foster within them the opportunity to share and teach their own language? Part of the idea of listening is don't presume you know what a word means. Don't presume you understand what they're saying. Ask the question. You talk to me about faith. Well, what is faith to you? What is belief to you? Not, oh, I know what the word means, but fostering a deeper connection. There are opportunities for that. There's sometimes not opportunities for that. And again, in a crisis mode, you've got to kind of be able to respond and react. But there are opportunities also to learn with that person, walk with that person. One of my president-elect, Rabbi Joe Ozarowski, Walking in God's Way. That's the title of the book that he wrote. I think if I'm missing the title, it's off by a little bit. We are walking in God's way if we take that into account. We're walking. We're on a journey. We don't necessarily have to know it. We have to be able to walk that experience. And know our limits, know where you're comfortable with and know where you're not comfortable with. That's part of the training too. It's to learn what are the things, how far do you want to take it? Where are the boundaries for you? Where are the boundaries for that person? Where is the rubber band that you can stretch them? I remember one person, you remind me of another story. I remember one person I went to visit, and she was dying, and I shared prayers with them, and the family said, can you say a prayer in Hebrew for them? We want to hear that too. And we walked on that path together. Of course, I read it in English as well, but the idea is that they wanted to hear from me where my heart was too. And it's a reciprocal relationship. And I think sometimes we have to be mindful of that reciprocal relationship. And it's not just a one-way street or a hierarchy. We are in this together. You're here in that end, and you're here, and I'm here on this other end. But we're walking a path. And so I think that helps. That can be a way to learn this as well. And that's where CPE, again, that's where all the training becomes so valuable. Is you're under somebody's guise. You trip up. I tripped up. We all tripped up in our training. We all know this. We all know the mistakes that we may have made, but you learn from them, and you also learn what fits for you. Not every model fits perfectly for each chaplain too. You learn what are the ways that you want to ask a question. What are the ways you want to sit, talk, learn, listen. How do you want to? Where is your heart line? Those are things that you're trained in CPE that help you when you get into the professional world. And you're continuing to learn, of course. I mean, we have requirements for continuing ed too, which I should just make clear, because we're always learning new. There's always new to study. There are things we don't know. It's a license to learn. I think they say that about smicha, right? You get smicha, and it's just a license to say, now go and learn.
Exactly right. It's just the beginning after all those years. It's now you've begun instead of now you've finished. Now you've begun. And sometimes you don't realize that until a couple of years after.
Right.
But you mentioned, the continuing the fact that we're learning. So before we start running out of time, talk to me about what really has been the most challenging things dealing. We're 11 months into this pandemic now, and you deal with it every single day. What are the greatest challenges that chaplains face dealing with this pandemic?
So I will, as any chaplain will start by saying, I will speak from my own experience, because obviously I can't speak to every chaplain. I think I have two hats to put on here. I'm going to put my NAJC hat on first, because that's like a quick answer to the question, is chaplains supporting chaplains. The NAJC has really ramped up support of each other in a way that I'm proud as president to say that I think we've hit a new stride and level in that as an organization. We, by the end of February, beginning of March, myself, my board, a group of chaplains who've done a lot of work in disaster care, we began to sort of really brainstorm, what do we need? What do we think we need to do to support our membership? So we have support groups for almost all types of the professions. If you're in long-term care, there's a support group, community chaplaincy support group, et cetera, et cetera. We have on and off run a general support group. The NAJC is focused on, we need to support each other, because if we don't take care of ourselves, right, the famous motto, you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of everybody else. And we need to take care of ourselves. Our cognate groups have done the same. Chaplaincy organizations around the country have done the same for their chaplains as well. I think that's lesson learned and really had to be doubled down on, is caring for oneself. From my professional work as a chaplain at a senior living campus, we have an assisted living, we have an independent housing, our assisted living, Stein Assisted Living, independent build senior residence, Wilent senior residence. We have a hospice, Stein Hospice. We have beginnings of a home care agency, which I haven't had much work with them at this point. But we're almost the CCRC minus the nursing home in that sense. The biggest challenges that I've experienced, I want to put them into, I think, 2 or 3 categories. So one is the inability to connect with people the same way as before, and that's really the hospice side of it. Hospice care during COVID has been very complicated for chaplains and social workers as well, in that on the one hand, we are as valuable as ever in supporting our colleagues and supporting our families that we care for. On the other hand, if I'm somebody at home, or I'm somebody in a nursing home, or I am a nursing home, I'm going to distinguish between the nurse and the chaplain. And so sometimes you don't get that same connectedness that you had in the past. I've done less visits. And for me, tele-chaplaincy has not been as strong as I know for others. It's a challenge that one is always trying to navigate. I think that's first and foremost, is how do you navigate electronic support for people in their dying days or months? There are FAQs, there are pieces, there are documents that describe it. I just know that I've struggled with it. Even as somebody who's technologically savvy, I struggle with, what does it mean to talk to somebody and never see them? Right? And the offer of FaceTime, yes, maybe, sometimes, it depends. In long-term care, I think the struggle is really the isolation and loneliness. And I said before, it's a reciprocal relationship. The people who live here or who live in any long-term care feel more isolated, feel lonely, don't have the same connectedness with their families and their friends that they used to. And we feel it too. And I think the challenge is being able to juggle that supportive feeling from the personal emotional feeling. I think one of the things that CPE really trains somebody in thank God I had all these years of work before this and the training and all this, learning how within that reciprocal relationship or that transference relationship and countertransference and all the other terms that we use, learning what are the triggers for me while at the same time being able to support somebody else. Knowing what are the things that are setting me in that sense and trying to say, well, I need to put that on when I walk in the room, that's going to stay here on the side. And I will pick it back up when I leave because I need to grapple with it. This has been a lonely time. This has been a challenging time for all of us. And if somebody says they're not feeling that loneliness, I would wonder. And I don't mean that as an attack on anyone. I just would wonder, well, what are you feeling then? What is really going on? And you're blessed if you don't feel that, to be honest. It's lonely. They miss their families. They miss their loved ones. They miss happy occasions. They miss sad occasions. I did a funeral recently. I think I shared this I think I shared this somewhere else, but I did a funeral recently, 2 funerals, in fact, for a husband and a wife, just a few weeks apart. Myself and the funeral director were the only people at the cemetery. The family was on Zoom. How lonely is that for them not to be there? How lonely is that for the clergy to not have the family physically present? That's a challenge. And I think that those are the challenges. We have to lift up both sides of that challenge. What does it mean to do a funeral where nobody's present physically? And yet they're present, because I want to be clear. The word virtual is a very complicated term in today's world. You're present. You're not physically present. And I've had personal experiences like that, not just professional, where not being present for celebrations and for deaths within family. And I think that when we recognize that in ourselves too, we can learn something. And I think the fear, I said this in the webinar we did, the webinar we did 2 months ago with the Wurzweiler School of Social Work. I said this there, and I'll say it again. It's the fear every day that COVID might knock on your door again, and not just for one person, but for a whole group. If it knocked on your door once, there's a fear of it knocking again. If it didn't knock on your door once, there's the fear of it happening. And I say knock on your door. I use that metaphor very clearly because it's like when the door opens, you don't know what's going to be next.
Right. That's part of it. That's part of it. We don't know. You don't know.
And just the challenge of people are just tired. People are tired of the restrictions. People are tired of the limitations. Professionals are tired of it, and worse, but we do it every day. The people we care for are tired of it, but we do it every day because we see what can happen if we don't. Right? And to all of my colleagues who work in hospitals, I mean, like, when I see the images there, I can't, I know how much I feel. I can't imagine how challenging it has been for all of you as well. And I want to make that very clear. We can't imagine how challenging it is for those that are seeing the real devastating impact of what COVID has done to many people, physically and emotionally and spiritually.
Rabbi Bryan Kinzbrunner, the Director of Religious and Spiritual Services for the Wilf Campus for Senior Living in Somerset, New Jersey, and the President of Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains. I just want one last question as we're running out of time. Real easy question based upon what you've been just talking about, okay? With all the stresses and strains and challenges, Bryan, how does your faith sustain you in all these moments?
So I'm going to be an honest person. I'm going to be a very honest person. Depends on the day of the week. That's the first thing I want to say. It depends on the day of the week. You know what sustained me? It's interesting. I remember the day very clearly. So all the shuls locked down back in March, and we were all home for a couple months. And then the shuls in certain communities started to open up for limited outdoor and indoor services. The shul that I go to in Highland Park, Avas Achim, started indoor services, limited numbers, right around Shavuot. And I remember when that first happened, I was like, not yet, it's too soon. And then a week or so later, one day I woke up and I said, I need to take the opposite approach. I need to go back because I need to do something that's normal, in quotes. The door's opening for me to do something normal again in my life. I need to do it. And just that, I'm going to put that word in there. The ritual of going to shul has been at least once a day. I know the good rabbi in me should be going mincha marav too, but listen, I got to be real. I don't put on airs. I don't always make it, but once a day I go, and being able to go and daven, that's helped me. And you know what else has helped me? We're a religion, a faith, life that has been around for 3,000 years. We've had ups and downs. We've had tragedies. We've had joyful times. In a way, this too will be that. This will be another moment. We're in the moment, so we can't see it. But there are times where I say, it's another moment in the chronology and the history of the world, and a chronology and history of what Judaism is and what all religions are. And we will rise through this too. If I had to make 2 points on that, that's where my faith has got me right now. Ask me tomorrow, I might give you a different answer. As I said, I'm very much a believer that we can't. My chaplaincy has trained me that where I may be right now is not where I may be later or where I was before. And I've really grasped onto that point, and I grapple with it. But I think that also sustains me. The fact that I can grapple with it and say, I'm not feeling it today. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. Why is this still going on? And then another day saying, this is the way, the functionality of the world includes these ups and downs. And that's okay too. And let's hope and pray and continue to do the thing and be diligent, both of those things, so that we can see that other side and that hope. Let's hope so. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
No, that's quite nice. So we wrestle as Jacob every day.
Yes,
and especially
we wrestle
now.
As Jacob every day. And
so Todah Rabbah.
Jacob didn't stop wrestling till the end of his life, so let's keep wrestling.
So why should we? Absolutely. Right. It's every day. Bryan, right. Thank you very much, very, very much for sharing your soul. And Hatzlacha, continue good luck and just stay healthy. Just stay healthy. So take care. And
Richard, thank you again for the opportunity, and you stay healthy too, and continue all the good work you're doing by bringing this to people and letting people hear the messages that are out there.
Thank you very much, sir. We're trying to stay healthy. To all of you, thank you again for watching today's edition and listening to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. The show is available through the usual outlets for podcasts and is available on the Roku platform as well. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and you can email me at Rabbi Address at JewishSacredAging.com. We invite you to visit our Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page as well. And if you would like to make a tax-free donation to help support the work of Jewish Sacred Aging and the continuation of these podcasts, we invite you to go to the website, JewishSacredAging.com, and click on the conveniently located Donate button. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of the Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and we give a special shout-out and thank you to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. I look forward to greeting you on the next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, Todah, and Shalom.